Hey, this is Pastor John Mark again with another podcast episode, and I'm really excited about our guest today. I think you're going to be blessed. We have Reuben David with us, and he is the president and founder of a ministry called Launch Asia Ministries. And here at Cottonwood Creek, we support his ministry. He's actually a part of our church as well, and he works with our church and kind of helps us with cultural connections at the church. And as such, I wanted you to get the opportunity to meet Reuben today, hear a little bit about a ministry that you already support, and then also, Reuben, you tell us kind of about your work over in India, but also we as gospel-centered people, we're surrounded by people who are in the Hindu faith or have moved here from India, and we would love to know, how can we share the gospel more effectively? How can we befriend them more effectively? But first of all, Reuben, tell us a little bit about you personally.
Yes.
You grew up in India. How long were you there? Where'd you grow up?
Well, it's so delightful for me to be here with you, Pastor John. Yes, I grew up in India, in the southern part of India, in a city called Bangalore, which is considered to be one of the India's smallest cities of 12 million. That's how big the country is.
That's a small city in India.
That's how big the country is, over 1.5 billion, with 27 national languages, thousands of dialects. Is the most diverse country in the world. So growing up in the southern part of India, so my parents come out of the Hindu background, and that's how they came to know Jesus Christ, from a totally pagan Hindu world. In a sense, I was born into the first Christian family. And my parents took on this radical step and said, you know what, we are now followers of Jesus, and let's name all our children from the Bible. That's how we get the name Reuben David.
Okay.
It's not a typical Indian name, And people confuse me in the airports. Are you Jewish? You got two, Reuben, David. Well, I tell them, I do believe in the God of Israel.
Yes.
So growing up in India, into the first Christian home, my parents took on this bold, radical step. They faced a lot of oppositions and pressure from the cultural settings in the country, because predominantly it's a Hindu culture, and then there are Muslims too. And I recollect the days of my growing years, all my friends and my relatives are all Hindus, and the only Christian kid in the block, and they all have their own idols that they worship, and we are somehow reading Bible and Christmas. Those memories were very different to me when I went out and saw a totally different culture. But that said something to me that early on, when I was in my 13, 14-year-old, I took on this challenge. People would ask me, why are you believing in Jesus? Well, we've got millions of gods here. Why do you want to add on Jesus to that? Yeah. And I took on that apologetic challenge very early on to defend, look, Jesus is very unique. He's not a white man's God. In fact, Jesus was born in Bethlehem, not in Boston.
That's right.
He's more Middle Eastern than Western. And then I also told them, look, it says Middle East, not even East. What if Jesus was just born in the East? That would have added another, total definition to his Eastern world. No, he's in the middle, which simply means he's for the East, the West, the North, and the South.
I love that. Yeah. And so you grew up, your parents, they were adults when they were saved.
Yes.
Did they already have you? Like, were you a child or something?
I was born.
Okay, you were born.
Yes.
And they went from Hinduism to Christianity, and they became radical about it.
Radical. And back in the 50s, India had seen a massive revival. Like the Evan Roberts of the Welsh revival world, India had its own revival movement with a man called Bhakt Singh. He was born in 1903, and then he started this indigenous church movement. And my parents were swept into that revival.
I love that.
Basically, what he said is, Jesus is for all.
Right.
Let's not westernize our Indian churches. Let's flow with the way God has created us to be. So I saw that early on, sitting on the floor, on the mat, eating food together. All things that are very different from the Western American churches.
I love that. I love what you just said, these indigenous churches.
Yes.
Let's don't westernize our churches. Let's let that culture dictate what the church is like. Now, you can still preach the gospel. You can still preach the uniqueness of Jesus Christ, and then allow the reality of the church to reflect its culture in some way, because there's difference between theology and culture, right?
Yes,
and so it sounds like you really found that. Tell me about the heartbeat. So So at what age did you move from India here to America?
In my late 20s, so 25 years old, I left India. I got an opportunity to study in Washington, D.C., Regent University, based in Virginia Beach, is the main campus, but they had a satellite campus in the D.C. area. I already was a journalist in India before I came to the U.S. So I studied my second master's degree here in communications. And eventually the Lord led me to Minneapolis, of all the places.
Of all the places. So India to Washington
to Minneapolis. That's
so,
where I worked.
And were you using your journalism degree at that point?
Yes, I was. And then I worked as a college professor at North Central University in downtown Minneapolis for 8 long years. I was teaching communication. I looked at my class, and these are all Midwestern American students, and this is an Indian professor. We're smack dab in the middle of a different America.
Wow.
You can't get more lily white than Minnesota America.
Probably not.
Right?
Probably not. So when did you make that shift from I'm a journalism communications teacher, professor, to, man, I need to start sharing the gospel. Exactly. I feel like God called me to share the gospel.
Very much. Every time people would see me, they would always say, well, you're Indian, you look different. Yes, of course. And then you believe in Jesus Christ. Yes, I do. And then that would give me a kind of a bridge to talk about, look, I'm a Christian first. And then an Indian second. I always put my nationality secondary because to me, my identity is not even in my nationality, where I was born. It is in my Christian conviction. I'm a Christian first. What do you mean you're a Christian first? Well, I believe Jesus is the only way. But then you're from India. There are millions of gods. That allowed me the challenge. In fact, Minnesota, where I was teaching, has the largest Somalian immigrant population in the United States.
Really?
I don't know if you knew that.
I did not.
In the entire U.S., the largest Somalian immigrant population is in Minnesota, a large number of Muslims. And then you have the Indian population too. People who work for Target and Best Buy, all the engineers are from India. So I had the Indian population and I had the Somalian population. So the Muslims would ask me questions and the Indians would ask me questions. Why are you always among the white people, white churches? Then I had to tell them, look, America is a country that was founded on the Bible. It so happened that America became a Christian country because of the Christian worldview on which it was based. Any country can become Christian because of the Bible. And I'm a Christian, and Jesus is transcultural. And that opened up doors for me to teach, even in the classrooms, on apologetics, worldview topics, Jesus among other gods. How do you make an effective case for the supremacy of Jesus?
Love it.
And one by one, they would allow me, asking me to debate and have some lecture sessions. So I would go on these Indian nights and, Middle Eastern talks and global talks on religion and faith and culture.
Wow. And so that led to you beginning to go back to India a lot and begin to preach and then ultimately launch Asia. When did Launch Asia get started?
About 7 years ago, I moved to Texas. I love Texas. It's the kind of culture that I grew up in India, at least the weather. I can take heat any day than the cold.
Yeah, that's what you had in Minnesota. So you would rather be here in the Texas heat.
Any day. I can always deal with the heat, but not with the cold.
I love it.
And so I feel very at home here. When I grew up in India, this was kind of the weather that was. Although Texas is much hotter than Bangalore. But after coming here, the Lord placed it on my heart. Look, I brought you to America. You're an American citizen now. And there's something uniquely distinctive about your platform that you can use. Born in India, raised in India, educated both in India and America. I thought to myself, I can offer something back to the rising middle class and the growing Gen Z population in India. They're also searching. Yeah. And I have to make this point. Many years ago, a famous New York Times journalist called Tom Friedman wrote a book called The World is Flat. What he meant by that is, look, the world is not geographically flat, but it is being flattened by culture, trade, commerce, and media. So if you go anywhere in the world, major metropolitan cities, young people are on social media, Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. In that sense, it's a flattening in the world.
Right.
So India has the highest number of social media users. So I thought to myself, these are young millennials and Gen Zs that I can bridge the gospel. And Indians are already spiritual people. They're open to the gospel. The question is not putting Jesus among other gods,
Right.
but to defend him as the only God.
And that is the dividing line right there.
That's the dividing line.
At least in my experience
Yeah.
and playing sports with my
Yeah.
kids and getting to know Indians, they are all willing to add Jesus
Absolutely.
to their
Oh,
religion,
yeah.
But it's when we begin to talk about the exclusivity
Exactly.
of Jesus being above every other God, the only God,
Exactly.
that's kind of the dividing line. So let's go back.
Yep.
Launch Asia Ministry, you're really focused
Yes.
on reaching the young Gen Z
Yes.
university population.
Yes.
So tell us exactly what you do in India.
Yes. So back in India, I made a lot of connections with the colleges and universities. And in the city of Bangalore, it's called as the Silicon Valley of India. It's the highest number of IT professionals. What we do is we have a base mission center where we host talks on faith, culture, religion, generic talks on what is human dignity, and that draws people into a conversation and to talk about what do you mean by human dignity, what do you mean by culture and religion and faith, and that draws them into a conversation. So we have open meetings like that. Although right now Indian government is pretty hard on the Christians, we have to do it undercover and with wisdom. We do those things inside a closed building. And then in terms of the compassion outreach, we also help out with the blanket drives for the homeless people. We distribute food bags for the people on the streets. And then we offer young pastors some amount of help in terms of food and clothing and shelter. All of this compassion outreach is also going on simultaneously, while at the same time our base mission center also has youth meetings. And now we started a church plan. People are coming on Sunday morning services. These are all young, new believers, totally new to the faith. It's exciting to be among them. And the way they're worshiping the Lord and their questions about Jesus. And I'll tell you, 90% of them are like, I had a dream about Jesus. I saw the man in the white. He calls my name.
Right.
And these guys have no clue about the Bible and Christianity, but they see Jesus in a dream.
It's almost back to the book of Acts there.
Excellent. Exactly the book of Acts.
Wow.
And I tell that man in the white is Jesus.
There you go.
He's come for you.
So now you mentioned something that's kind of been a change.
Yeah.
You mentioned the government is really beginning to step
Yes.
back in and say a little bit more than
Yeah.
typical was no to Christianity, because there was a time, wasn't there, where India was very
Oh,
open to Christianity,
absolutely.
and now the new government is really kind of
Correct.
saying we're a Hindu nation, correct?
Exactly. India is only about 80 years old now. 1947, it became a free country. So it was under the British colonial rule for 200 years. America is 200 years old. India is still an infant country in that context.
Wow.
So the country is trying to find itself an identity. Who are we as a nation? Are we a secular country or are we a religious country? So they're trying to find their civilizational identity.
I got it.
And that's where they're saying, I think we are Hindus.
Got it.
We're not Muslims. We're not Christians. We need to hold on to our culture. I can understand why they're saying those things. But again, in terms of the Constitution, India is a secular country.
Okay.
That's how it works.
Constitution,
It's a secular country.
but they're drifting more towards their cultural
Exactly.
heritage of Indian. Now, you mentioned a couple of things in sharing with the Gen Z. Speaking a lot about human dignity.
Yes.
Tell us, kind of help us understand
Exactly.
why that is, and for
Yes.
those who may not know
Oh, yeah.
much about the Hindu culture.
Yeah. Basically, Indian Hindu culture is a vast religious spectrum. There's so much to it. It's a religion that believes that everything came out of chaos. It's the idea of nihilism, that out of nothingness comes something. And so the idea that man was created out of some aliens, is that their idea of a creation story? It's very different from the biblical creation story. This is where the Bible is very different. We believe that God made man. In the Indian culture, they don't believe that God explicitly made man. The idea of being God making man is very confusing in that culture. Therefore, we don't know who made me, therefore I don't know what my identity is. You could be a lion, you could be a tiger, an elephant in your previous birth, or you could be a rat or a dog in your previous birth. And that's why this caste system puts people in different categories. So the idea of a human dignity is not there in that culture. That is a disturbing problem in the Asian world. I can't tell you the source of it, but I keep hearing that growing up. The tears of my neighbor is not my concern. Contrast that with the gospel.
Yeah.
Love your neighbor.
Love your neighbor as
Love
yourself.
your neighbor as yourself. So only in the Bible we have the creation story of God making man in his image. For me, I had a culture shock when I first came to America. I saw people loving on dogs and cats. No country in the world where animals are so loved than America. I almost feel like, hey, in India they do. They worship animals. Let's not go too far there.
Yeah.
We are different from animals.
Right.
God has made us uniquely different. Jesus made us in his image. That's what gives me identity. If you believe that, you will respect a human being.
So in India, even today, you would say that the caste system that we all have probably
Yes.
taught about in school,
Yeah.
learned about in school, it's still very much in place.
It's still there. It's still there. If you go to the villages, there are places in India where you can't mix with the other caste. There's no intermarrying with other castes, no mixing with other castes. And you can get killed if you marry somebody outside of your caste.
Okay.
It's very funny in the Indian matrimonials, if you were to read, well, I'm looking for a wheatish person of this particular caste and then this subcaste. Whole litany of your backgrounds.
Wow.
It's not your character. It's your background. It's a caste system.
Well, how's the work going? Is
It's
it being
great.
successful?
It's been
and I love
great.
you're reaching university.
Yes.
You're combining that with the compassion for those who are
Exactly.
hurting, those who are
Yes.
in need.
Yes.
But then you're also planting a church now.
Absolutely.
So how is that going? Is it going
Great.
successfully?
In fact, the 2 years during the COVID, I got stuck in India. It was a blessing in disguise. For 2 long years, I was in India at that time. With the help of some government officers and officials, I did get some permission to go out and distribute food bags. And that opened up a unique door. In fact, the missions grew more during the COVID times than at any other time. We had tons of people that we met, villages we went and handed out. You know, a $20 worth of a food bag can feed a family of 4 for a month.
Wow.
Think about it.
Yeah.
$20, a food bag, mostly rice and lentils, can feed a family of 4 for a month.
Wow.
We were distributing that left and right to villages and places, and so the ministry has grown big now.
So
Yeah.
COVID actually helped propel your ministry because I'm assuming
Absolutely.
you were one of the only ones out there
Exactly.
demonstrating
We
real
went out.
compassion, real love, and
Yep.
that's part of the gospel. That's part of who we
Absolutely.
are, right?
Yeah.
And so as we think about that, that's an injury we're excited about partnering
Yes.
with you, having you
Thank
part
you.
of our church, and part of what we want you to do is help us as a
Yes.
church make cultural connections here.
Yes, exactly.
So here's what we know.
Yeah.
We all pass in the grocery store, or
Yeah.
we live in our neighborhood, or
Yeah.
at the pool. We are surrounded by people of the Indian culture.
Exactly.
Maybe the first generation, second
Yes.
generation. So help us understand the culture here. Is it different here? Is it
Yeah.
kind of a hybrid Hinduism, or what do you typically see when you meet? What would be the difference between those who live here and those who live there?
Correct. In India, it's almost like a classical Hinduism.
Okay.
In the West, it's sort of a modernized, westernized Hinduism. It refines itself in the Western culture, blends itself in the Western culture. Hinduism can adapt itself to different cultures because it doesn't have the belief in the absolute nature of God. So it says, all right, I'm relative. I could blend in any culture. I can take on anything. So most Indians who are in America are very educated Indians, as you know, doctors and lawyers and engineers.
That's
It's
right.
the creme de la creme.
Right.
So they're very thinking Indians, very reasoning Indians. One of the ways that I've helped, in fact, I did a workshop at the church here a few years ago, how to reach the Hindu neighbors.
Was that before COVID?
Before COVID.
I thought when you got stuck over there for 2 years, I was sitting there going, yeah, I remember that.
Right.
That's been longer than I thought.
Exactly. We took a team from here, our church, to the nearest temple here. And the priest was very good. He said, yeah, well, we can have a discussion. And I told our friends here, look, if you look at this temple, it's got 3 layers. I mean, this is one of the ways we can connect with our Hindu neighbors right here in Frisco and Allen and McKinney. That the Indian temple has 3 layers: outer court, inner court, sanctum, sanctorum. The average Indian even doesn't know that. So we could ask them, hey, do you know that's in the Bible too, in the Old Testament? And the way to go to the sanctum sanctorum is not through the priest. I know you have a priest. That's what Jesus did.
That's what Jesus did.
That's what Jesus did.
So there's a
became the priest.
crossover clearly there.
Very crossover.
Yeah.
That's Jesus became the high priest. Now you have direct access. And when you say that to an Hindu, he's like, really? It's there in the Old Testament? Of course. And you know what? There are prototypes of the gospel in all cultures.
Right.
We use that.
I love that. So what else besides that? Typically, they're going to be open to a conversation about faith even?
Very open to conversations. Indians are spiritual culture people, and they're open to conversation. And if you say, hey, look, just wanted to share with you as a Christian, love to actually invite you to the church, I would say majority of Indians will come. They're like, yeah, I can experience a church, There's not like, oh, I don't want to come to a church. At least the Indians in America are educated class.
So an invitation to church is, I will tell you, we've noticed that over the years with some of my girls. We coached with them, and they would show up. I'd invite them; they'd come, and it was great. And so an invitation to church will open up more conversation.
Exactly. And many Indians living in America are pining for the Indian tea and the Indian food. And let's say we do an Indian night at the church.
Okay.
We could draw them all. Let's have an Indian night, Indian food, Indian tea. Well, feels like home. I want to come to Cottonwood.
That's right. Okay. All right. Well,
something like that we can organize.
That's why you're part of our staff.
I would love to do that.
Indian night at Cottonwood Creek.
Indian night at Cottonwood.
Okay. You're going to have to be the chef, or at least tell us what. We can't make it. We'll buy it.
Sure.
Okay.
We've got some great restaurants. They can get us some interesting food too.
I love it.
And that's a good draw for people.
Yeah.
I went to the church. I didn't feel alien or foreign. Had an Indian tea and so welcoming. The Western American churches are so good to us. They know instinctively America also is a very hospitable culture. It's an embracing culture. They know that in their hearts.
Yeah.
And that's why they're here. Given a chance,
yeah,
they wouldn't go to anywhere in the world. They'd come to America.
Come here.
They know that.
Wow. I feel like we've been blessed,
we have
in our area to have the Indian people from Indian culture to want to be here.
Yes.
And so as part of that, we need to do our part.
Absolutely.
Part of our call is the Great Commission is to go and make disciples. And right now, here's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
You've just sat here and given us permission.
Yes.
That person who's living next to someone from the Indian community, someone who goes to school with them when they're talking to them, they are some of the kindest, most generous people in conversation. That take that next step. Invite them to church.
Oh, that's it. Invite them to church. Hey, we've got a program. We'd love to have you. Christmas, Easter. Hey, just come on in. Just have an experience. Even a Sunday morning service. We'd love to have you to our Sunday morning service. They will come. They're very spiritual people. They're longing for God.
I love it.
Yeah.
Golly. What we see primarily surrounding us would be, if they were back in India, they would be in the top.
Correct.
When we think about the
elite culture.
Elite culture.
Yeah,
okay.
They've been elite culture.
Okay.
And the second generation Indians are already born and raised here. They know there's no going back.
Okay.
I'm American now.
Really?
Maybe culturally have got some residual culture left inside of me with food and other things. But I'm part of the greater American cultural context. They know too.
Yeah.
And that's a good blending for us to bring them in. It's no more just a white church. Look, guys, we're all one in body in Christ.
Boy, I love that thought.
We're all one body in Christ.
Joy, as we think about our culture, we're supposed to reflect our culture.
Exactly.
And this is just one community that we should really be looking to embrace, invite to church, share the gospel with, and create deep relationships so God's Spirit can move in their life.
Yes. And food is a great connector. We offer some food and bring them in, and they love it. And even they too are willing and yearning. Will somebody call me? Will somebody?
Hey, Cottonwood Creek, thank you so much for everything you do. But hopefully you were challenged and encouraged with what Ruben said, is that the Indian culture, they're spiritual people.
Yes.
And if we're willing to be bold enough, and the reality of to invite someone to church doesn't require a lot of boldness in our country, right?
That's right.
But just step across and invite someone to church, and they're going to come.
Yes.
They're going to come. Ruben, man, we're going to be praying for you. I'm excited about what God's going to do.
Thank you. It's been an excitement for me too. Thank you so much.
All right. God bless. Have a great day.